What's up, you guys? Welcome back again to your Heroclix headquarters. Today we've got some exciting new stuff to go over. Lots of rules changes coming out for 2023, and these will be in effect with the release of the upcoming Spider-Man Beyond Amazing set. So that set should be coming out probably in March. I believe it's still scheduled to come out in March. That could change, but just know that with the release of this Spider-Man set, that's when all these upcoming rules changes should apply. So now WizKids put out 4 different articles about all these rules changes. I'll try to post links to all of them in the description below so you guys can go and read them yourself. Now, I think that's really important because it lists everything, like all their thought process and why they're doing this, etc. I think it's important to take a look at that for all those reasons so you can see, from their own words and their own perspective why they're doing these changes. But anyway, without further ado, let's just dive right into it. I want to be talking about them in a little bit different order than they did in all of the rules articles, so I'm actually going to be starting with one of the last changes, and that is that we're getting new character cards. Yeah, it's kind of weird. I didn't really expect this change to happen, but I'll post them on screen for you guys here. So that's what they're going to look like now, from now into who knows the future, whenever they maybe decide to change the cards again. I've seen some people say they don't like it. I personally think it's fine. I've also heard a lot of people say they love it, so it's kind of a love it or hate it thing. I think it's okay. I know when the cards changed before, the last time they changed and put the dials on the backs, everybody was freaking out, it's end of the world, everything, and I think we kind of got over that pretty quickly. I really liked the old cards, though. I thought they looked really nice, but these ones definitely have some advantages and disadvantages as well. They put the dial on the front this time, being the main thing, and they also put the entire picture of the sculpt. They have the whole thing on there. So it is easier for new players or people who don't really play the game to kind of pick out which figure belongs to which card, I guess, which is fine, and I don't really mind that being there. I personally would have preferred it to be on the back, where, I would have preferred the more pertinent information, the more important information on the front with all the, special powers, traits, and abilities. I would have liked that to have been first and foremost on the front, and then, put the awesome sculpt picture on the back. You may also notice that there's no longer any flavor text on the cards. They chose to remove that to save some space, which is fine. It doesn't really make any difference gameplay-wise at all. You might have those instances occasionally where somebody's like, how is that character able to do that? Why does that character have that power? Or whatever. You read the card and it's like, oh yeah, of course. I guess that makes sense. But then you have sometimes where you're like, that still doesn't make any sense because it's just like a quote from a movie or a comic or something. And they just wanted to put it on there because it sounds cool without really making any reason for why they have that power. So, it didn't really matter before. I could see not liking it. I wish it was still there just because it's fun to have those. There's a lot of Deadpool cards that have some really funny ones about, being a Heroclix figure. So I'm going to miss that, but in the long run, I don't think we're really going to miss it that much. I think we'll just get used to it not being there. I don't even read half the flavor text of cards anyway, unless it's a character I actually care about. So, no big deal. So I just wanted to start with that. Just beware, starting with this new set, cards are going to look different. So I think that's really important to know. Don't freak out if you buy a booster, if you haven't bought in a while and be like, oh, what the heck is this? It looks so weird. That's why. They're just changing the cards just to change it up. I don't think they really gave much of a reason. They just wanted it changed, which is fine. But anyway, moving along, once you've gotten used to the cards, I think we'll all get used to the cards after a set or two. It's not really a big deal. The next biggest change here is when you actually are going to play with these cards and figures and put them together on a theme team. Well, the rules for theme teams are changing pretty drastically. And that is because they are removing theme team probability control entirely, just getting rid of it, which is, I will say this, of all the rules changes we're about to talk about, this is the only one that I personally am not a fan of. That's because if you guys watched any of my team build videos, you guys know I really love to play teams, like theme teams. I really love, having that theme team prob. In fact, back in the day when you actually had to give an action token for using theme team prob, I would have a designated theme team probability control character, like that one character that's just already a support character with leadership or perplex or something that's gonna probably be near my character anyway. have them lined up to take that action token to prob stuff. That was always my strategy I used several times and how I built several teams. But yeah, so I got used to building with just not having to do that, which is great because, you could like have your main guy charge out there and prob himself if need be. But now you can't do that anymore. So that's definitely going to affect the way I build teams and probably everybody else going forward, and I'm sure as well. So let me know your thoughts about that because that's a pretty big change. No more theme team probability control kind of sucks in my opinion. Like I said, I love theme team probs. I always build theme teams anyway. I personally am one of the ones that thinks, trying to make a theme team out of a certain keyword, it kind of limits you, but that I think is one of the funnest parts about team building is trying to make this cohesive team with whatever keyword you're working with. And, really finding how the certain characters you have access to and the certain point values, making that all work. And I really like that. There is still some, kind of bonuses for building a theme team. You might ask, if there's no theme team probs, what could that possibly be? Well, you do still get a +3 to your initiative roll to decide first player at the beginning of the game. And that's actually changing a little bit too. So beforehand there was some complicated math going into it. You could get a potential +3 over your opponent. So if you both had theme, they had like 4 characters and you had 7, you could get +3. If they had, basically you just couldn't get more than +3 over them. If you had like 10 characters and they had 3, then you'd still just get a +3 themes, +3 to your initiative roll at the beginning of the game. So that, it was kind of complicated. It took a little thinking during the beginning of the game. And it's a lot more streamlined now. So if you have a theme team, no matter how many characters are on it, you get a +3 to your roll to decide first player. And if you don't have a theme team, you just don't get that. So it does still give you that bonus to decide who's going first. And that is another change because now you actually get to decide who is going to be going first. This is another change. Used to be you would just win and you get to go first, you get to pick map, etc. But now there's going to be a huge change to this where whoever wins the roll-off at the beginning of the game is going to choose if they want to go first or second. And now second player is actually the one who gets to pick map. First player is actually the one who chooses what side of the map they want to start on. So they flip that around. So, it's a little more, I would say it's more fair that way because, it used to be you go first, you pick map, like that's all the good stuff right there. And then you just get stuck with whatever side they put you on, but who cares, it's your map. As long as you're prepared for both sides of it, you're good. But now there's much more strategy involved in thinking like, do I want to go first and be able to pick what side of the map, or do I want to go second to pick the map itself? Because in addition to that, now there's, this big update to terrain and objects as well. Objects are now just a part of terrain, and we're actually going to be able to place 3 terrain markers at the beginning of the game, which includes objects. They're like a subset of terrain. But this is huge because that means you're going to be able to bring in different chunks of hindering, blocking, and elevated, and maybe water, who knows, to be able to place on the map at the beginning of the game. And this is a huge update. This is a very, very cool thing that I really can't wait to try out. The way this is really going to play out is if you're going second and choosing the map, then your opponent who's going first chooses what side they're on, and that means they get to place their characters and their terrain first, so they might be able to place their terrain in the most advantageous way, but then going second, you get to place your characters and terrain last, meaning you can kind of counter whatever they set up first. So there's a lot more give and take here to going first and second, because, depending on how they place their big chunks of blocking, elevated, hindering, whatever, you can kind of counter that with your own as well. They did specify that there's certain areas on maps now that are going to be, basically, you can't place terrain here. You can't block off, like, ladders going up elevated. You can't block off, like, narrow hallways and stuff like that. So they're going to have little specific things saying you can't place terrain here. Might be like a little symbol. They said specifically, like, I think the ladder symbol, like going up and down elevated, and I guess I think they might use that same thing for other chunks of the terrain. Just basically, I don't know if they're going to have it specifically saying you can't place terrain here, but there's going to be some way that you'll know that you can't place terrain there. So regardless, it's still a huge change. I think being able to place terrain is a really, really cool new thing that I can't wait to play with and try out. But this whole change to who goes first and how to do it is pretty big also. I think it's more fair. I definitely think it's a lot more fair to both players, so you don't just get stuck going second and getting put on a bad map and having to deal with it. Now, you know, there's a lot more give and take there. There's a lot more strategy for going first or second. I think that's great. I do think that is awesome, and it's just going to take a little getting used to, you know, with placing the terrain and everything especially, but I think once we get all used to that, it's going to be great. But speaking of, you know, placing terrain and choosing sides of the map and all of that, they also are going to be shrinking the maps down. So we're no longer going to be playing on a 2 foot by 3 foot map, which is like 16 squares by 24 squares, I believe. It's now going to be a square map, 2 by 2, which is like 16 by 16 squares, I believe. So they're going to be shrinking down the maps, which is, you know, a lot of people, again, freaking out about this right off the bat. I think this is a good change, personally, because this is going to make games go a little bit faster, first of all, and that's the main thing they pointed out. They want people to get into the fight and just get to it right away. And I think that's great, because, I mean, that's what we're here to do. We're here to have superheroes fight each other. It's gonna be awesome. So yeah, getting into the fight quicker, especially with the new equipment rules we just got with the Batman team up set. We no longer have to take that first turn to equip anything anymore, so that's going to just really make you just be like, okay, TK, charge, let's go, fight me. So I think that's gonna be a great change. And again, that's where placing your terrain is really going to come in handy with, you know, blocking off. If you put a big chunk of blocking right in front of your starting area, you know, it prohibits people from hitting you right away, but it's also going to hinder you from being able to TK and go attack yourself. So there's a lot of that counterplay. Maybe just putting it in front of their starting area, because you can't put terrain in starting areas, but you can put it like right outside of them. So that, you know, if you see they got just TK running shot, you could be like, oh, let me just push this huge blocking right in front of your starting area and just completely stop you from doing that. And it's going to have to force them to get over that or destroy it first, because you are going to be able to take the, you know, destroy actions to be able to blow up these chunks of terrain objects, just like you did with objects and blocking terrain and walls, etc. And each of these is going to have its own unique value for how much damage you need to destroy it, as well as some values that you're going to be able to use to pick them up and use them as terrain, like object actions. I think it's terrain actions now. It used to be object actions, where you could pick something up with super strength and smack somebody with it, or even just pick up a regular light object. So yeah, now that we place terrain instead of objects, objects are going to be, there's still going to be a thing. They're like I said, a subset of terrain now. And there's only going to be one type of object. There's no longer heavy objects, which is fine, because with the changes they made in the last update, they were pretty much useless anyway, except for the fact that they gave you hindering. They counted as hindering for line of fire, where light objects didn't. So I think going forward, all objects are pretty much going to be considered light objects, meaning anybody can pick them up, anybody can throw them for range for 2 damage, anybody can use them as a melee weapon for +1 damage. I think that's going to stay the same. However, now you can also, if you have super strength specifically, and there's a few other powers that changed, we'll get to that in a minute, but super strength got a huge upgrade, and also TK, I'll just mention that's another big one. But you're going to be able to use these terrain pieces that you're placing on the map as kind of like old heavy objects in a way, because they're all going to give you a certain basic amount of damage that you can get if you throw it, and I'm pretty sure the base distance for throwing it is going to be 4 squares if you take an object action or a terrain action to throw it. I think it's going to have its own value though. Each of them have a little lightning bolt with its own range value that you can use to throw it with. And they will also have a giant reach value, because some of these objects aren't just, you know, a big tire stack or something, or a desk. They're like, you know, a shipping container, or, you know, I could see them doing like a tree or something. a car, you know, these things are going to be able to give you giant reach now as well, which I think is a huge buff to super strength and just object action attacks in general, terrain action attacks in general, because it used to always be great to get +1 damage, but now you could potentially get giant reach on top of that, you know, +2, +3 to your reach. If you're just hitting somebody with a giant shipping container, bam. And I mean, that's so freaking cool. Who doesn't want to do that? Who hasn't wanted to do that in a game of Clicks? You're lying if you're telling me that doesn't sound freaking awesome, to pick up a giant shipping container and smack somebody with it 3 scores away. That's so freaking awesome. I can't wait to do that. And it's gonna have its own damage value, so much like, you know, heavy objects used to do +2 or whatever, these are all gonna have their own damage value for how much extra damage they deal when smacking somebody with them, which could be +2 or even +3 for some of them. But generally speaking, they all have like a baseline of +1 with no giant reach, and I think 2 damage with throwing them for 4 squares. But yeah, like I said, they're all gonna have their own range value for throwing them, their own damage value for how much damage they deal if you throw them. It's not your own damage, it's how much, you know, the thing does when it hits something. And then however much giant reach it can give you, and however much damage it increases your close attacks. So it's a lot to take in, and also, like I said, it's gonna have its own particular value for how much damage it takes to destroy them. For most things, it'll still be 3, I believe, just like it used to always be 3 to blow up blocking or destroy objects. But some of these, being huge, you know, shipping containers and desks and whatnot, are going to be 4 damage potentially for some of them. You know, cars, ships, whatever the heck they decide to make terrain for, it's going to take maybe 4. I could see some of them even taking 5 damage to destroy, because you're not just destroying one little block, you're pretty much destroying the entire thing as far as I can tell. I don't really see how they would do it in a way where you know, just place a little debris marker on it, and it wouldn't really make any sense. So I think if you destroy it, it just wipes the whole thing. It might place debris in some of its squares. I didn't really see anything about that now that I think about it. I might have to double check. But I don't believe you place debris. I think it just goes away. Unlike if you blow up actual blocking terrain on the map, it would place debris. I think it's only when you blow up actual blocking terrain. If somebody read that and I missed it, please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But anyway, so that's all super awesome. It's a lot to take in, a lot of different rules changes with, you know, how we start setting up the game, and you know, how we place terrain and how we can use that terrain in our attacks. And speaking of terrain and maps, while we're here, there was also a slight update to elevated terrain. So you can, just like always, use the stairs and go up it, or if you have improved movement, elevated or flight, whatever, to ignore it and go over it, you can continue moving fine. But now it's gonna act very similarly to how hindering used to, in the sense where if you cross that level of elevated, you can, you know, pretty much you can cross it whenever you want to. You don't need a ladder, but you have to stop your movement right there at that first square over the elevated. So it's kind of like, I don't know, I guess some heroes can kind of just barely jump up there with all their strength or something, or maybe you take the elevator or something and just, you know, go boop right there. I don't know, but you know, there's ways to do that now. I think that's really interesting. There used to be ways where on the right map, you know, it's impossible to get to a certain area unless you have flight or something. So you can just sit up there safely in your sniper's nest and shoot down at people. But now, you know, you might be able to charge up and just get that one square right on the edge where you need to be to punch somebody. You know, some pretty interesting stuff there. Or even just to kind of lock them up so they can't make a close or a range attack, you know, because you can't make range attacks while adjacent. So even if you just hop up there, you're going to force them into a close combat fight, and they can't shoot your other pieces. So that's another strategy you can use going forward. And that's pretty cool. You know, I don't know if that's going to come up a whole lot, but I feel like it'll come up enough, and it's going to be one of those things you're going to have to remember. It's going to take some getting used to, but once you remember it, I think you could use it pretty effectively. Like I mentioned, just stopping those little sniper nest situations. And because you're going to be able to place your own terrain now, you can kind of put that elevated wherever suits you best. But you got to be careful because they're bringing back knockback damage now as well. So of course, knockback damage left the game entirely with the rules update in 2021 with the Wonder Woman set. And that was probably my biggest gripe of the whole thing. I really missed knockback damage. I really, really wanted it back. I mean, it just kind of feels bad when you're punching somebody and knocking them back into a wall, or you're knocking somebody off a cliff or something, they fall, oof, like that should hurt somebody, right? Especially like a regular human character, maybe not Superman or whatever, but hey, you know, it should probably deal some kind of damage, even if they can reduce it. So it's great that they finally brought back knockback damage. Now, one thing I will point out is a little different than before. Pretty much all the rules are the same, except before you used to be able to do 2 knockback damage if you knock somebody off a ledge if elevated for falling. It no longer does that, it's just 1. So same thing if you knock them back into a wall or a, you know, blocking or a higher elevation. If they stop, then they're going to take 1 damage for knockback. If you know, knock them back off of elevated, they're going to stop and they're going to take that 1 damage of knockback damage. So they kind of reined it in a little bit, so it's not as easy to get 2. And I think one of the main reasons they did that with the falling thing was because you're also going to be able to deal knockback damage if you remove elevated from under a character. So if you are playing one of the pieces of terrain that is elevated and you have your characters up there, you have to be careful because somebody could come along with Telekinesis or Super Strength and yank that piece of elevated right out from under your feet, causing everybody to fall in the same square they were in, but take a knockback damage. So that's a really interesting strategy, I think, as well. You have to be really careful when you're putting Hawkeye up in the sniper's nest. Hulk might come along and yank it right out from under his feet and make him fall and hurt himself. So you really have to be careful with that. I mean, it's still a really good strategy to have those, you know, set up those little sniper positions, but you just have to be worried about that now and have to take that into account when you're, you know, picking your targets, what you need to outwit, etc. Outwitting Super Strength is going to be a big deal. Super Strength is going to be a huge, huge power going forward. I just know it. It's going to be one of my favorite powers now because with the way that the whole terrain thing is, you can pretty much pick up a piece of blocking terrain, like from a barrier, and smack somebody with it. And it counts as basically hitting them with an object attack, kind of. So, you know, it's that same basic rules of hitting them with terrain. So I think that's going to be really cool. You're going to have to be really careful if you just sit there and barrier up the whole game, because if, you know, I got somebody with charge and super strength, I can just come over there and just pick up the barrier and smack you with it and use it against you. So I think that's another really interesting mechanic, because you know, it's so annoying to just sit there. Those teams that can just have 2 or 3 barrier pieces that just back and forth, take turns putting up a barrier every turn. And you got to either take your time to shoot it out and make some space for somebody else to make a shot in there, or, you know, you just kind of got to get around somehow. But now we have a better way to deal with it, unless you had somebody that could just shoot through blocking or charge through blocking, which is also great, which is another thing they made a tweak to. So now whenever you have improved movement blocking, it will actually immediately destroy the blocking you move through, which is a big change. It used to say after resolutions, destroy all the blocking moved through. So technically you couldn't park yourself on blocking, you had to move all the way through it. So that's kind of more like a quality of life change. Like, it makes more sense to destroy it immediately as you're moving and be able to stop in the middle of it if you want to. I think that makes a lot more sense than you know, the way that it was before. So let's go ahead and continue on into some of the powers that will be changing. And with this change to powers and the shortening of maps, there's also going to be a change to the basic range values, like the minimum range values of everything. So pretty much any time that you've ever seen it say minimum range 6 is now going to be replaced by a minimum range of 4. So that's a pretty big update. So the reason for that is basically just because they're shortening the maps, so there's just, you know, not as many squares, not as much range. You don't need as much range to, you know, get where you're going, basically. So everything that was 6 is now 4 to kind of go in line with the shrinking maps and everything, just to keep it more balanced. I think that's a pretty good change. I know that with the last rules update, they said they were really trying hard to make close combat as good and as fun and useful as range combat, because range has always been better because it's ranged. Obviously, it's like, of course, you're probably going to rather make a range attack rather than try to run up and punch somebody if you have that option. But, you know, with superheroes, they tend to fight up close with their fists quite a bit, so it is a lot more awesome now to see all these changes to making close combat better, like with super strength change. And also Quake will be changing. That's another power that's getting a big update. It is now going to be its own close action. Now, for the most part, it's going to remain the same besides being a close action instead of whenever you make a close attack. Except it's also now going to destroy all pieces of terrain within 1 square. So all the blocking and terrain markers and that kind of stuff is all going to be just destroyed immediately whenever you quake, within 1 square of you. So that's really cool. You know, you have a way of destroying multiple pieces of terrain at once. So you could really alter the map. You know, you could really easily wipe out some, you know, huge chunk of terrain or something. But then you also, you know, just continue to make a close attack targeting all adjacent opposing characters. So it's basically the same. But like I said, making it be its own close action now is kind of a huge nerf, in the sense that it used to be whenever you made a close attack with the Wonder Woman rules changes, and that actually let you combo with a lot of things that you're no longer going to be able to do. Like, it used to let you combo with Flurry, so you could Quake Flurry, so you could actually basically just Quake twice, hitting everybody next to you. I know that was actually a big strategy for Sky Tyrant, because he had like full move, charge, Flurry, and Quake, so you just charge, Flurry, Quake, hit everybody for 2 twice. I think he had Exploit also, so it was penetrating on top of it. So hitting everybody adjacent to him for 2 pen, which is, you know, awesome. But now that it's its own costed close action, you won't be able to do that anymore. It's going to be either you Flurry or you Quake. So, you know, I mean, the Exploit still works with either one, because that triggers off any close attack. A Close Combat Expert would still work technically with either one, but it still only does 2 damage, so you get like the +1 attack or something. But yeah, basically it's not going to work with Flurry anymore. And, you know, there are some characters like the Prime Giganta from the Wonder Woman set who had her retaliation thing, and then she could use Quake and, you know, basically hit everybody for her printed damage value of 3 and give them a token. You can't do that anymore. Now you have to just wait to actually take an action to Quake. If you do the retal, you're going to only be able to hit 1 person. And that's a huge nerf, I think, to Prime Giganta. I kind of hope they give her some type of errata or something to let her use Quake with her retail so that she could play as she always did. I mean, she was never, like, game-breakingly powerful. She was always just, you know, good and solid figure. So I don't know. That's going to take potentially a couple erratas on a couple figures, or maybe that's what they did intentionally to kind of rein those figures in a little bit. I don't know. It definitely is something to remember, though. You're not going to be able to Quake with any close attack anymore. So yeah, a lot of changes there with Quake to keep in mind. But moving on, there's also some big changes to Telekinesis, obviously. This is the other big one that had to do with, you know, moving objects around. So now you're actually going to be able to move terrain around, and that's going to be huge. That's going to be such a good, you know, power to have. Telekinesis was already a great power and pretty much a must-have on most teams, but now it's going to actually, I think, be a definite must-have on almost every team, because you're going to have that ability to move terrain from, you know, one place that might be disadvantage to you if somebody just puts a huge chunk of blocking in front of you, and just TK it over here. Just move it out of your way and, you know, give you that free line of fire for maybe another TKer to TK somebody out and running shot or whatever. So that's great. Again, this is going to be with the shortened range of minimum 4 squares, and also that's going to mean you're only going to be able to place things 4 squares away. So, you know, TK, it just keeps getting a little nerf and a little nerf every time, because I think back in the day it used to be 10 square reach, and you could place things 10 squares or something. I'm pretty sure when I started it was 8 for the longest time, and it's been 6 for a long time now as well. So now it's going to go down to 4, but it's still going to remain quite a useful power, because with the shortening of maps, again, and, you know, the shortening of ranges, that 4 squares is still going to be hugely useful. So just to be able to move the terrain out of your way, or TK somebody out there into position more. So that 4 squares is going to be a lot shorter than we're used to, but I think it's still going to be just maybe more effective than ever because of the terrain rules now. You know, like I said, being able to yoink that elevated out from under somebody's feet and deal them knockback damage is going to be great when you can just TK from 4 squares away. It is going to be still within your range of line of fire, though, I believe. So if you do happen to have somebody with, say, 8 range telekinesis, you can still do it from there. Just minimum range is 4, and you're only going to be able to place the thing 4 squares away. So you can still use it on friendly characters or pieces of terrain. But now we can make terrain, object, whatever attack actions again with telekinesis, and this is a huge thing. It really, really sucked, in my opinion, that they had to remove that from TK with the last rules changes. And I just love having that back as an option, because that, you know, it really makes those kind of support characters that are just there because they got like TK and something else, it really makes them shine, because now you're going to be able to TK these huge chunks of terrain that have, you know, their own printed damage value of like, say, 3 or even 4 when used in a range attack, and you're going to be able to make a range attack with that and just throw that at somebody for 4 squares away. And that's going to be great. I think characters like Venom Magneto, who's already an amazingly good character, I think stocks in him just went way up. This is also something you could actually do with a range action. So you could actually running shot TK, pick up an object, and throw it at somebody, hitting them for 4 damage with a big chunk of blocking or something. It's going to be great. It ups his own damage potential greatly if you're just playing him at 35 points, which most everybody usually does. Or just TKing 2 characters out is great, or TKing 2 terrains out of the way is great. You know, having that telekinesis and 1 as free is just super useful now, and just because it's got such a major upgrade. Again, even just having somebody who carry up like Venom Magneto, and then like free TK elevated out from somebody, boom. That'd be pretty nuts. There's lots of really cool things you can do with this, with the new TK. I like it a lot. I'm really looking forward to it until I get hit with it, probably. Then I'm gonna hate it. Probably not. I'm still gonna have a lot of fun with it. Let me know what you guys think about all these changes. Also, another one was Pulse Wave. This is a big one in my opinion too. Pulse Wave is now, because ranges are being shortened, and this is across the board, you know, all the powers like Outwit, Perplex, Prob are gonna be within the 4 and Line of Fire instead of 6. And character ranges in general are going to be shortened because of the map sizes. So the actual Pulse Wave power, instead of halving your range, is now just going to give you a flat 4 range. So it's pretty great. I think they did the 4 range to keep it in line with everything being 4 range. But in my opinion, it's actually a buff, because so many people with Pulse Wave already only had like 4 or 5 range, maybe 6 range for the Pulse Wave, meaning that they would only be Pulse Waving for 3. So now that it's just a base Pulse Wave 4, no matter what, it's actually, you know, bigger for a lot of characters that didn't even have that much range to start with. You know, even the characters that had 7, 8 range, it's still going to be 4, so they're not going to really notice a difference. There's very, very few characters that this is going to be nerfed for. If you're one of the few characters that had a 10 range and was able to get Pulse Wave, which off the top of my head, I think maybe the new Hal Jordan and Sinestro would have maybe been able to choose Pulse Wave if somebody was next to them with it, but then you're damaging your own character. And just to get that extra 5th square, not really worth it. So yeah, getting that 4 damage range on Pulse Wave I think is going to be a pretty big buff to the power. And it was already such a useful power. They didn't bring back the single target Pulse Wave for full damage, unfortunately. I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon. But yeah, this is a nice change as well. Oh, but before I forget, there is also one other thing I want to talk about really quick, which is the resolution of action changes to some of the timings of things. So you guys may not have even known this, but there is a, you know, order of resolutions for basically if there's multiple effects that trigger at the same time. The turn player is the one currently who gets to choose the order of all of those effects, how they resolve, how they want to resolve them, in which order. So this happens really, I would say the biggest time this happens is currently with like swap out teams. The first player gets to choose the order of all the resolutions of actions, so they could force you could force your opponent to like swap first before they got to do any other effects they might have, like generating bystanders and stuff like that at the beginning of the game. So that was a strategy you could use before. And for also, like if you have traded steel energy and you like flurry on somebody and they have mystics, well, you could choose the order of resolutions to take the mystics and then heal the damage from the steel energy if you had it, you know, traded in your top dial. But now there's going to be a change to the resolutions of things where first player is, the turn player is going to get to resolve their effects in the order of their choosing, and then the opposing player gets to resolve their effects in the order of their choosing. And if any other effects pop up in the middle of that, After the second player goes, and the first player goes again, resolving their effects, and then, you know, so on and so forth. Starting, however, with any immediately resolved effects. So if there's anything that says immediately after resolutions, you have to do that first, and then your opponent gets to do any of their immediately resolve effects first. And then you go back to your after resolutions effects, and then theirs, and then so on and so forth. So this, you know, it does add a whole new level of strategy. Again, this is not going to be something, I don't think it's going to come up a lot unless you're like a highly competitive player. So you may not even notice this change. However, it will come up for certain instances. Like I said, if you had traded Steel Energy and you were on top click and you punched somebody with Mystics, you know, before you would choose, okay, I'll take the damage from Mystics and then I'll heal. No longer can do that because you have to choose first. So you would have to choose to heal, but you wouldn't be able to heal anything. And then your opponent could choose to deal the damage and whatever other effects might happen. So, you know, for that type of interaction, it does kind of suck. But for the interaction of like swap out teams, it's kind of good for them because your opponent can no longer, you know, mess with the way that you want your actions to resolve. So you'll now be able to place all your figures or generate your bystanders or whatever the heck, and then replace stuff, you know, in the order of your choosing. So that it does help out those swap teams a lot. And there's a few other little interactions there. So I think it's just good to know. Again, I don't think, unless you're playing super competitively, it's not going to probably make much of a difference to you, but it's definitely something worth knowing. So I just want to put that out there so you guys know about it at least. Anyway, moving on. So yeah, that's pretty much all the changes to the powers, all the different changes to the maps and terrains and to the initiative, and no more theme probs, and the change to the character cards. So there's a lot of changes, a lot of crazy stuff. I think a lot of good changes. A lot of knockback damage is coming back. I love that. Lots of cool stuff. The terrain thing I think looks super fun. Just picking up a huge, you know, chunk of blocking or a huge shipping container or something to just smack somebody with is going to be so satisfying. Dealing knockback damage because, you know, not only do you get to hit somebody with that, don't forget Super Strength also gives you knockback on close attacks, so you could potentially knock them back for another damage as well. So lots of great stuff there. I think Super Strength went from like the worst power to maybe the best, one of the best. Telekinesis, already a great power, even better. Pulse Wave got a buff. Quake got a nerf and a buff at the same time because, you know, blowing up chunks of terrain next to you is great, but it's its own close action, which kind of hurts it for other characters. So yeah, I mean, lots of changes there. I think mostly great ones, mostly positive stuff. Again, the changes to the cards are fine. We'll get over them like we've gotten over the last changes to the cards. I mean, I don't really hear anybody complaining about the size of the sculpts anymore either, so I don't think that's really an issue either, even though everybody made a big deal about it. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of all these changes down in the comments again, please, because I'd love to talk about it with you guys. I think, like I said, everything seems really awesome and fun, and you know, it's going to take a little getting used to the cards. It's going to take a little getting used to the shorter maps and shorter ranges and everything like that, and the terrain markers, but I'm really looking forward to all of that stuff. And I hope you guys are too. I hope you guys are as excited as I am. The only thing I don't like is losing our theme team probs, because I'm going to have to do a lot of, you know, tweaking of how I make my theme teams. Maybe theme is just not really a thing anymore, right? Maybe it's not worth playing themes anymore. Let me know you guys' thoughts on that. But if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you smash the like button. It does help me out a lot. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. And if you guys would like to help support the channel even more, make sure you check the links in the description for our Patreon so you can see your name here in the credits with all these other awesome people. And just for as little as $1 a month, you get added in there, as well as all of our monthly Patreon giveaways. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you check that out with the links in the description. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Until next time, this has been Heroclix Headquarters, signing off.